The heater buzzed in that low, tired way it always did before the sun had fully stretched. I was tucked beneath the quilt on the pull-out, still as a photograph, my breath slow enough to stay invisible. From the kitchen, I heard her voice. Clear. Flat. Cutting. She's just dead weight now. There was a clink of a spoon against a mug. No one disagreed with her. I didn't move. Not a twitch. But something inside me crumpled like foil. The kind of crumple that doesn't bounce back. Their voices drifted like smoke, casual and cruel in the same breath. The way you talk about a coat that's out of season. The way you forget someone can still hear you. I stared at the ceiling, at that same crack above the ceiling fan I'd traced with my eyes every morning. But now, it looks different. Everything did. Their laughter came next, soft and lazy. But I stayed quiet, and I stayed still. The blanket felt heavier that morning, like it had soaked up the weight of her words while I slept. I clutched it tighter, not for warmth, but for something to hold on to. My hands curled into the worn edge. Where the threading had started to unravel last winter, I could hear the heater ticking near my feet, trying its best to soften the morning chill. But the cold didn't come from the room. It had settled somewhere deeper, right behind my ribs. I stared at the wall. The clock ticked. Once, twice, again. Each sound felt like a step farther from the woman I used to be here. The mother. The helper. The one they once asked for advice. Now I was just the space between their sentences, and the quilt couldn't protect me from that. The morning stretched on. Light crept through the curtains, turning the room a pale gray. I stayed beneath the blanket, still listening. Their voices in the kitchen carried on, talking about grocery sales and coffee filters, like nothing had been said. Like I was just furniture in the background. That's when I realized something I hadn't let myself feel before. I wasn't meant to still be here. I was supposed to go quietly, to shrink into thank yous and disappear into usefulness. But I hadn't. I'd stayed, breathing, taking up space. And now I was an inconvenience. The thought sat heavy in my throat, but I didn't swallow it. The smell hit me first. Coffee, fresh, sharp, a little too strong. It drifted through the air like memory. I used to love that smell. We'd sit at the table, my son and I, mugs clutched between both hands. We'd laugh about nothing. She'd hand him sugar with that soft smile. Now I wasn't part of that circle anymore. They brewed the coffee the same way, but the air was different, colder, more distant. The kitchen was still just one room away, but it felt like a different house. Like the version of me that belonged to those mornings had been packed away with the holiday decorations. I listened to them pour, stir, sip, and I wondered if they even noticed the difference. I didn't cry. I just stared up at the ceiling, the same off-white I'd seen for months. Only now I noticed how the edges were yellowing, how the paint cracked near the molding. Small things, easy to ignore until you finally look. That's how it felt. Something inside me shifted, nothing loud, just a tilt. A quiet understanding that crept in and made itself known. This isn't love anymore. It was care, maybe, habit, certainly, but not love, not the kind that warms, not the kind that welcomes. Once you see that, you can't unsee it, and I didn't want to pretend anymore. They laughed from the kitchen, something about the toast being too dark. Something about the weather turning warmer next week. Harmless things. Daily things. But I stayed still under the quilt, not out of sleep, not out of softness. I was done pretending this house was my home. Their laughter didn't reach me. It rolled through the room like background music, familiar but disconnected. Like a commercial playing too loudly during a show you're no longer watching, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for not joining in. I just felt done. The door creaked a little when I opened it, and there she stood, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the room like she was checking for danger, not furniture. one small suitcase by her side and a purse she clutched like a shield. "Hi," she said, voice thin, barely touching the air between us. I nodded. "Come in, sweetheart." She stepped over the threshold like it cost her something. The floorboard groaned beneath her step. I watched her glance toward the couch, the window, then back at the door, like she wasn't sure if she was staying or just resting a moment. "Leave your bag there," I said softly. "I've got tea on." She hesitated before placing her suitcase beside the coat rack. Her hands were trembling when she reached for the mug I offered. She held it like it might vanish. Like warmth wasn't something she knew how to hold anymore. That's when I decided this would be her safe place. No questions, just space to breathe again. I brewed the tea the way my mother taught me. Low flame, long patience, a generous spoon of honey. Chamomile. Always chamomile when someone's heart is unsettled. She sat at the table without me asking her to. I noticed how her hands cupped the mug once I set it down. Not just holding it, but soaking it in. Like she hadn't felt anything warm in weeks. I sat across from her, stirring my own cup slowly. The afternoon sun spilled through the window, laying soft light across the tabletop. The kettle still hummed behind us. The room felt full, even in silence. She didn't speak, and I didn't press. I just watched the steam curl upward, dancing like something trying to find its way. After a long minute, she exhaled, one of those deep, chest-emptying breaths that says more than words. I didn't need her story that day. I only needed her to know she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. She spent a lot of time out on the porch swing. Evenings, mostly, after the dishes were done and the world had quieted. I'd find her out there with her knees pulled up and her eyes looking somewhere far past the garden fence. I didn't ask what she was thinking. I didn't ask what had happened before she came here. I knew that kind of silence. I'd lived it, once too, so I sat beside her. Sometimes I knitted, letting the needles click softly while the breeze rustled the lilacs. Other times, I just rocked gently next to her, listening to the creak of the swing. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every now and then, her fingers would brush mine on the armrest. Accidental, maybe, or maybe not. I never moved away. I just wanted her to know, without words, without pressure, that I saw her and I wasn't going anywhere. I was pulling weeds near the rose bed when our neighbor called from across the yard. "How's your girl doing?" I glanced up, startled by how natural the answer came. "She's all right," I said. "My girl's settling in." "My girl is Jim," slipped out like something I'd always meant to say. Later that day, I told her the story while we were hanging clothes out back. "You called me your girl?" she asked, her voice barely above a laugh. I nodded. Didn't realize I had, but it felt right. She didn't say anything after that, but I saw her look down, then away, shoulders softening just a little. She didn't need to say it. I could feel it in the way she lingered beside me that afternoon, folding pillowcases slower than usual, like maybe she was beginning to believe she belonged. We never sat down to define anything between us. She just started baking muffins one day, blueberry, the kind I always used to make when my son was little. I swept the porch that morning, humming to myself, letting the dust settle where it would. Some days we spoke. Some we didn't. She'd leave a plate of warm muffins on the counter, and I'd leave fresh towels in her room. That was our way. Her footsteps got lighter over time, her voice steadier. I watched her shoulders drop a little more each day, like she was learning how to let go. That was enough for me. I didn't need titles or definitions, just the rhythm of two women sharing a roof and a quiet kind of care. She knocked a bag of flour off the counter, trying to reach the sugar, and it exploded like a snowstorm across the kitchen floor. I gasped, then groaned. "Oh Lord, now look at this mess." She covered her mouth, eyes wide. But then she laughed. Not a little chuckle, a full laugh, shoulders shaking, head thrown back like something long locked inside her had finally cracked open. It echoed off the cabinets, it bounced in the corners, and for a second, I just stared. That sound. It had been missing for so long. I turned away, mumbled something about the mop, and ducked into the laundry room. I leaned against the wall, let out a breath, and cried, not from sadness, but because I had forgotten how beautiful hope sounds. I thought I could fix her, with warm meals, clean sheets, kind words. I thought love was a recipe. You follow it step by step, and the bread always rises. I gave her all I had, my stories, my time, my quiet belief that we could build something gentle together. And for a while, it felt like we did. Like the house was breathing differently. Like we were stitching a new kind of family. But people aren't recipes. Even soft hands can't keep someone from hardening when the past refuses to let go. I see that now. And it doesn't mean I regret loving her. It just means I know now. Love isn't always enough, but it was what I had to give. The plate she handed me was warm, fresh out of the dishwasher maybe, but her fingers barely brushed mine, and when they did, there was no pause, no acknowledgement, just contact without meaning. I looked up, half expecting a smile, a glance, something. Nothing. She turned back toward the sink, already rinsing another dish. The sunlight danced sharp across the counter tiles, bouncing off the faucet like it had more life than the room did. There was a time when she'd hand me a fork and grin, say something soft like, "Still the best mashed potatoes I've ever had." Now the silence between us felt colder than any winter draft. I stood there with the plate in my hand, not quite sure what to do with it, or myself. It was my kitchen, but I didn't feel at home in it anymore. Just placed there, like a dish, one really wanted to use, but didn't have the heart to throw away. It started small. I'd speak, and she'd nod, maybe, or mumble. Then she'd leave the room, just for a second, but not return. At first, I thought she hadn't heard me, but it kept happening. I was thinking we could, and she'd be gone, grabbing something from the garage or suddenly remembering laundry. One day, I stood in the laundry room folding towels, talking about the robins nesting outside the window. I'd always loved the way they came back every spring, like clockwork. I said all this aloud. When I turned around, the room was empty. The only response was the dryer humming behind me, steady and indifferent. I finished folding in silence, the towel edges lined up perfectly. That used to matter to her. Now, I wasn't sure she noticed anything I said, or did. Maybe she had too much on her mind, or maybe I wasn't part of it anymore. I heard her voice before I saw her. "Come eat, baby." It was warm, sweet, a voice filled with fondness. I smiled, my heart rising just a little, ready to walk into the kitchen. But then the dog's collar jingled, and there she was, crouched down, setting a bowl on the floor for him. My feet stopped before I reached the doorway. I stood there, the smell of toast lingering in the air, the kind that used to be waiting for both of us. She scratched behind his ears and laughed softly. He barked, happy and wanted. I stepped back into the hall. There's a kind of silence that doesn't shout, it just erases, and I felt myself slowly, softly, being erased. She looked at me while passing the salt, but it wasn't for me. Not really. Her. Eyes skimmed past mine like I was a painting on a wall she'd seen too many times to notice anymore. There was a time she mirrored me. When I worried, her forehead would crease. When I laughed, she'd smile before I finished. But now? Nothing. She slid the salt shaker across the table, her hand pulling back quickly. She didn't even look up to see if I caught it. I blinked, maybe too many times, trying to catch her attention, trying to remember if she ever really saw me or if I had imagined it all. The refrigerator hummed behind us. The food on the stove bubbled low. But between us, the quiet was loud and heavy. I stopped asking. stopped starting sentences I knew wouldn't find an end. I'd open my mouth to share a recipe memory or a thought about tomorrow's dinner, and then I'd stop myself. Why bother? Her responses had turned into shrugs or worse. That's nice, paired with a glance at her phone. So I let the thoughts curl back down into my chest, like petals retreating from cold air. I began to speak less. To be less. I don't think she noticed, and I'm not sure what hurt more, the silence or the fact that it felt easier than trying. The kitchen grew quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence of something wilting, and I was the flower. I woke to the smell of eggs, toast, and the sound of the sink already running. I sat up slowly, a blanket tangled around my legs, the house unusually bright for that hour. I shuffled into the kitchen. Plates were stacked in the sink. The coffee pot was half full. 2 mugs sat empty on the counter. 1 chair pulled out, the others tucked in. They'd already eaten. No one had called for me. No toast left warming on the stove. No plate set aside. Just crumbs. Just silence. I sat anyway, folding my hands on the table, letting the light fall across them, and I waited. For what? I didn't know. But the quiet that morning wasn't soft or sacred. It was absent, and it tasted worse than cold toast ever could. The dishes were done. The dog had been fed. She'd gone upstairs with her phone and her sighs. The house had fallen into that soft kind of quiet, the kind that used to mean closeness. He sat on the recliner, the TV murmuring a game show neither of us were really watching. I was on the couch, hands folded, legs tucked to the side, waiting for the right breath. Is something wrong? I asked, my voice just above the hum of the static. He didn't look away from the screen, not right away. I already knew the answer. A mother always knows, but I needed to hear it, or maybe just see it in his face. The room didn't flinch, but I did. It felt like asking for something I already knew I wasn't going to get. He didn't meet my eyes. He looked down at his phone, tapped it once, then set it face down on the armrest. His fingers went to the hem of his shirt, twisting it the way he used to when he'd broken something as a boy. But this wasn't about a vase. This was something deeper. Don't make this harder, he said. Soft, almost kind. But it didn't feel kind. It felt final. He still wouldn't look at me. I searched his face for something, remorse, hesitation, even discomfort. But he kept his gaze on the carpet as if meeting my eyes might make it all real. Maybe it already was. He exhaled, long, slow, not dramatic, just weary, and in that sigh, I felt it. I was no longer a comfort here. I was in a conflict. Not in words, not in action, but in presence. Even sitting quietly on the couch, I was what made the air feel thick, what made their footsteps tense. I had become the reason behind closed doors and long pauses. He didn't need to say it. I could feel the shift in my bones, in the way his body leaned away from me without meaning to. Sometimes, silence is more painful than blame, because it tells you you're not even worth the argument. I folded my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking, not visibly, not wildly, just that soft tremble that lives deep in your bones when something inside begins to crack. My chest aches, not from heartbreak, but from holding too much inside. I wanted to defend myself, to say I'd tried, to ask him how it came to this, but instead, I smiled a little, just enough to let him think I understood. Maybe I did. That's what we do, isn't it? Mothers, we make room, even when the room isn't offered. We step back, quietly, leave notes instead of complaints, fold towels instead of making noise. So I smiled, and I stayed silent, because my love outweighed my pride, even now. He stood up. I'll be upstairs, he said. No kiss on the cheek, no pause, just those words and the soft creak of the stairs. I waited until I couldn't hear his steps anymore, until the door above clicked shut. Then the tears came, not loud, not messy, just soft, tired drops that slipped down into the wrinkles. Life had etched into my cheeks. I didn't cry because of what he said. I cried for what I finally knew. I cried because love can stretch itself thin and still not be enough. And in that moment, I was just a woman on a couch, in a quiet room, learning how to let go without a sound. He said he wanted peace, and I suppose I understood. But peace shouldn't feel like losing your child. Peace shouldn't come wrapped in silence and tight smiles, in meals taken separately, in a house full of closed doors. I thought about his baby forehead, hot with fever. The way he used to reach for my hand without thinking. The scraped knees, the late-night talks, the little jokes. And now, I was the ache he was trying to silence. I sat there in the dark, no lamp on, no TV anymore, just the sound of the wall, clock ticking, and the sound of my own breath trying to steady. Peace, they say, is quiet. But this kind of peace felt like being erased. The store was bright and a little too loud that morning. Wheels squeaked along the tile, voices low and tired. I kept my head down, focused on the list. Milk, cereal, bananas with a little green left. I wasn't there to linger, just grab what I needed and go. The lemony floor cleaner smells stronger than usual. Someone's child was crying faintly in another aisle. It all blended into a kind of dull hum in my ears. I turned the corner, picked up a bunch of bananas, checked the stems, and moved on. No one noticed. No one said hello. Even in a crowded store, it's easy to feel like you're floating, like you're made of air and soft shoes and breath no one listens for. The world felt distant. My list was short, and so was the part of me still hoping to be seen. I was placing boxes onto the belt, cereal, canned beans, a loaf of wheat bread, when I heard her voice behind me. "That's a lovely scarf," she said. I looked up, startled. A woman, maybe close to my age, with soft eyes and a patient smile, just standing there with a basket in hand. "Oh," I said, fingers brushing the scarf at my neck. "Thank you." It was simple. Just that. But my hands paused mid-reach. For a breath, everything around me quieted. The beeping scanner, the rustle of bags, even my own internal chatter. I'd worn that scarf every week for months. No one at home had ever mentioned it. But this stranger did. She saw me. And in that small noticing, something in me softened. Just a little. The cashier was bagging my bread when she leaned forward gently and asked, "Do you live alone?" I turned toward her, surprised, but not upset. Her tone wasn't prying. It was kind. "Sincerely, not quite," I said, with a small smile. That was the closest I could come to the truth. Not alone, just lonely. Her eyes met mine, and there was no pity in them. Just something warm and human, like we both understood what it meant to live in between things, between company and silence, between being needed and being tolerated. A child laughed somewhere nearby. I laughed too, just a little. And in that moment, I didn't feel so apart from the world. We walked out at the same time. She nodded at me by the exit, smiled again, and said, "Take care, okay?" Just like that. Not with pity, not with weight. Just warmth. Simple and clean. "Thank you," I said, trying not to let my voice shake. My bags rustled in the breeze as I crossed the lot. The sun glinted off a windshield, and I blinked against the light, thinking about how something so small could feel so safe. It had taken her no effort, but it meant everything to me. At home, kindness had become a transaction, measured out carefully, earned, rationed. But this woman, she gave it a breath. Some days, it's strangers who remind you, you still matter. When I got home, I unpacked slowly. Cereal, bread, bananas on the counter. I reached for the pantry and just paused. My hand rested on the shelf, and I stood there for a moment. Not tired, not rushed, just full of a quiet kind of remembering. I didn't just bring home groceries that day. I brought home a flicker of something warm. A moment I could tuck into my pocket like a photograph, small, folded, but always there when the house turned cold again. At least one person saw me today. And somehow that was enough to carry me through another quiet evening. He handed me the grocery cash like always, barely looking up from his phone. I smiled and nodded, said, "Thank you," like I always did. But later, when I was alone in the kitchen with the groceries half unpacked and the evening light slanting across the countertop, I took the loose change and tucked it deep into the corner of my purse, under the tissues, below the mints, right next to the pen that sometimes leaked. It wasn't much, a few coins, a wrinkled bill or two, but it was mine. It wasn't theft. It was a kind of quiet permission. To feel like I still mattered, to keep a piece of something for myself without explanation. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked. And somehow, that made it feel even more mine. A secret I could carry without guilt. A small act of dignity in a house where I'd long been treated like I had none left. I started reaching for the bottom shelves at the store. No more name brand anything. Just plain bags, store labels, boxes with simpler fonts and fewer colors. When they noticed a different taste, I said prices had gone up. They nodded, distracted, and kept eating. It was strange how little they noticed. The one who cooked, who budgeted, who turned groceries into meals, they hardly saw me. So I stopped trying to impress. Every swap saved me a little more. Not just cents, but space. Space for me. Each receipt told a small story. I could still make decisions. I could still provide, even if they didn't see it. I did. And that was enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. Not to myself. I used to do this when I was younger. Wash the foil, flatten it with gentle fingers, fold it clean. Tonight, it felt like muscle memory. I smoothed each wrinkle like I was folding linen. The sink dripped behind me. A candle flickered near the dish rack. The soap smelled faintly of lemon. I saved twist ties in a jar, rubber bands in a drawer. Not because I was desperate, because I remembered. There was a time when stretching what you had wasn't shameful. It was survival. It was pride. Each fold was a prayer, a little act of persistence, a whisper that said, "You still know how to care for what's yours." And I did. After dinner, when the house settled into its evening hush, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a drawer of coins and a pencil. The candle gave off just enough light to see the numbers. I counted slowly. Nickels, dimes, loyalty points, coupons. I clipped with steady hands. Every time I finished a line in my notebook, I'd pause. Just to feel it. It wasn't about the total. It was about what it meant. These small things were mine. They didn't belong to the house or the roles I was squeezed into. They were mine, and they proved something. I still existed. Not just as a helper or a background hum, but as someone quietly putting herself back together, one column of coins at a time. I wasn't saving out of bitterness. It wasn't revenge. It was returned. Each tucked away dollar brought me closer to something I thought I'd lost. I wasn't planning an escape. I wasn't crafting a speech. I was just reclaiming, little by little, a teaspoon of dignity here, a dime of clarity there. I had buried myself under compromise for so long, I almost forgot how I used to feel. But this small act of gathering, it reminded me that I still had worth, even if no one else noticed, even if the world didn't applaud it. I could feel it in my fingers as I turned off the lamp, stood from the table, and touched the cool glass of the window. Quiet, but strong. Like me. He was handing me the water bill when he said it. That little duplex near the park? Just went up for rent again. Then he smiled, like he'd just slipped me something private. Oh, I said, acting casual, like it didn't land square in the middle of my chest. I told myself I was just curious. Just needed some air. I grabbed my coat and walked the long way, the breeze tugging at my sleeves, the scent of early blooms threading through the chill. I wasn't looking, but something inside me was already stretching, reaching. Not to leave, to live. The house came into view like a memory I hadn't made yet. Quiet, small, still. And I just stood there on the sidewalk, my heart whispering one thing I hadn't let myself feel in months. Maybe the porch had cracks, real ones, wide enough for a penny to slip through. But they didn't bother me. The steps creaked as I climbed, slow and unsure. I pressed the door gently, and it stuck before yielding, like a place that doesn't open too easily for just anyone. The sunlight spilled inside across a wooden floor that had stories in every scuff. It didn't smell like new paint or bleach. It smelled like someone had made toast here, like someone had cried here, like someone had loved here. Lavender, dust, and memory. I didn't ask permission to step inside. I just did. Not because I was ready to move, but because something in that doorway felt more like a beginning than anything I'd stood in lately. She was already in the kitchen, older, hair tied back loose. A kind smile that didn't need effort. She looked up from the kettle and said, "Chamomile okay?" I nodded. She poured the tea into mismatched cups, handed me one without fuss. We sat at a little table by the window, sunlight laid quiet across the linoleum. Neither of us said much, but something in that chipped teacup warmed more than my hands. It had been years since someone made me tea, just made it. No obligation, no performance. It was small, but when she looked at me and said, "It's a peaceful place," I believed her, because the tea told me so. I walked through the rooms without talking. No one asked me what I thought. No one hovered behind, explaining features or timelines. I moved slowly, dragging my fingers along the wall, brushing the edge of the curtain. I stood in the empty bedroom with sun across the floor, dust dancing in it like music I hadn't heard in years. No one sighed at my pace. No one looked disappointed when I didn't say, "Wow." And in that quiet, I heard something rare. I heard my own breath. This wasn't a house trying to impress me. It was a house willing to welcome me, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to earn the space I stood in. She said it like it was nothing. "Here," she said, setting it on the table. "Just in case you decide." The key glinted in the late light. It was old, worn, small, but when I picked it up, it felt like more than metal. It felt like a choice. I curled my fingers around it slowly, my hand trembling just enough to remind me I was alive. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a bag packed, but I had this, and I hadn't had something of my own, truly my own, in years. It wasn't an escape. It wasn't a rebellion. It was freedom, and it fit in my palm like it belonged there all along. I packed before the house woke up. The sky outside was still dark, that kind of deep blue that feels like velvet. I folded each piece of clothing carefully, slow, deliberate. Like a ritual, shirt, pants, socks, the small sweater I wore when the living room felt too cold. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I zipped the suitcase gently. It sounded softer than I expected, like it was understood. Then I sat beside the couch, the place I'd called mine for months. It was still warm from where I slept. I ran my hand across the blanket I always tucked under my feet, smoothing it one last time. Not to tidy it, but to say goodbye. The refrigerator hummed in the distance. The house breathed like it always did in those early hours, without knowing who it was slowly letting go. And I sat there, holding still, before the sun and everyone else could catch up. I opened the door as gently as I could. No keys jingled, no hinges creaked, just the soft click of the lock slipping into place behind me. I stood for a second, breathing in the morning air. Fog hung low on the street, wrapping around the houses like a hush. My suitcase wheels made a soft tapping sound on the sidewalk. Steady, small, sure. Not hurried. I didn't feel free exactly, not yet. But the air tastes different. Clean. Quiet. Like something was about to begin instead of end. The dew on the cars shimmered. The birds hadn't fully started their songs yet. Just a few soft chirps here and there, like the world itself was easing into the day, and for once, I was part of the world again, not hiding in it. The note sat on the kitchen table. I folded it once, neatly. No long explanations, no scolding or heartbreak spelled out, just one line. I can't stay where I'm not wanted, and then my name. That was all. I placed it right where the sun was beginning to touch the wood, near the salt shaker. Somewhere easy to find, but not dramatic. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I wasn't going to keep hurting myself either. I didn't write it to be read aloud or kept in a drawer. I wrote it for myself, so that when I closed that door I could do it with my head high and my heart is honest. By lunchtime, the phone buzzed, his name on the screen. My son. I watched it light up once, then again. My fingers hovered, thumb brushing the answer button, but I didn't press it, not out of anger. Not out of revenge, but because this moment belonged to me. For the first time in a long while, I needed to know how it felt to let myself be. Uninterrupted, unasked, undisturbed. He called again. Then silence, and that silence wrapped around me, like a curtain slowly falling. I stared out the window. The box of tea is still unopened on the counter. A breeze from outside moved the edge of the curtain, and I exhaled. I was here, not hiding, just healing. They said I disappeared, that I left without a word. But they didn't remember all the words I'd already given them. Soft words, quiet words, tired words that never landed. This time, I didn't give a word. I gave myself, my presence, my breath, my body in a room that wasn't shared out of obligation. I made tea in silence. Sat by the window while cherry blossoms fell onto the sidewalk below. I wasn't gone, I was arriving. Not back to who I was, but towards something I hadn't been in years. I wasn't missing. I was becoming. And for once, I didn't ask anyone if that was okay. That evening, I sat on the steps of my new place, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, legs curled beneath me, a warm cup near my feet. The sky was softening, shifting from gold to purple. Light filtered through the leaves. I could hear kids playing down the block, their laughter distant and light. No one called my name. No one asked what was for dinner. No one signed from behind a door I didn't belong to. It was just me and the silence I had chosen. Not the kind that comes from being ignored, but the kind you wrap yourself in because it finally fits. I took a deep breath, slow and full, and it felt like the first breath I'd taken in years. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in spirit, in presence. She stood on the porch like a question she didn't know how to ask, shoulders hunched, mascara smudged just beneath her lashes. Her hands were clenched around the strap of her purse, like it might steady her. The late afternoon light brushed against her, golden and soft, making the moment feel almost too delicate to touch. A breeze stirred the cherry blossoms near the fence, petals drifting through the air like tiny apologies. Her eyes searched my face. I didn't speak. I didn't move, not at first, but I felt something loosen in my chest, not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the space where forgiveness could land if it needed to. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like the floor might disappear under her. Feet. The door clicked shut behind her with a sound softer than I expected. Sometimes grace doesn't need a speech. Sometimes it just needs a doorway left open long enough for someone to find their way back through it. The door had barely latched when she said it. I didn't mean it. Her voice cracked halfway through, and for a second I didn't know if she would finish the sentence. But she did. Soft, unsure, eyes lowered to the floor like the words themselves embarrassed her. I stood still, hands loosely at my sides. I believed her. I did. But belief isn't the same as trust. And regret doesn't repair what's been chipped away over time. I looked down at her shoes, dusty, worn at the toe, while the quiet wrapped itself around us. I didn't feel angry. I thought I would. Instead, I felt the weight of all the things we hadn't said, the long miles between us that no apology could shorten. But still, her words filled the room like a window cracked open, letting something new in, or maybe letting something old begin to leave. I walked to the kitchen without saying anything. She followed behind, footsteps cautious, barely there. I turned on the kettle, reached for the chipped mugs I always kept close, and pulled the honey jar from the second shelf. No questions, 2 cups, 1 spoon of honey, just like always. I didn't look at her while I worked, but I felt her watching, like she was waiting to see if the ritual still belonged to both of us. The kettle hissed. The mugs clinked. I stirred without spilling. Then I placed hers in front of her gently, hands steady, eyes on the tea. I didn't reach for her hand. I couldn't. Not yet. There's a difference between kindness and trust. That day, I had kindness to offer. And sometimes, that's the best a heart can manage when it's still finding its way out of hurt. She started slowly. "The house is quiet now," she said, staring at her tea. Quieter than I thought it would be. I didn't respond. She took a breath. "He doesn't say much, just come home, eat, go to bed." I listened. "I didn't realize how much of that space you filled," she said. "It's like there's an echo now." Her voice didn't shake, but her words did. I didn't interrupt. I just let her keep going. She talked about mornings that felt flat, dinners that didn't taste right, the way the dog waits by the basement stairs. She didn't apologize again. And I didn't need her to. Sometimes people speak to understand themselves, not to be forgiven, and I needed to see if she would actually say it all, without prompting, without being told what to feel, so I listened. Not because I wanted her back, but because listening felt like the first honest thing between us in a long time. I stirred my tea slowly, watching the spoon move in slow circles. It didn't need it. The honey had already dissolved. But my hands needed the motion. She sat across from me, quiet now, not pushing, not performing. I wanted to ask her why now, what changed, what took her so long, but I didn't. The silence between us wasn't tense anymore. It was clean, open, for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was swallowing my feelings just to keep the peace. I wasn't trying to teach her a lesson. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just there. And so was she. Sometimes, love doesn't speak. It just breathes. And that was enough. As the light faded across her face, something softened in her. Eyes, I remembered, the young woman who once stood in my kitchen, asking how I got the crust on my pies so flaky. The one who'd laugh when I hummed while folding laundry. The one who used to bring me a mug of tea before I even asked. I hadn't seen her in so long. But just then, for a flicker of a second, I did. Not the woman who muttered behind closed doors, not the one who forgot I was listening, but the one who used to reach for connection, even when she was afraid. And in that flicker, the ache in my chest shifted. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I remembered what came before it. And maybe that memory was enough to keep the door cracked open a little longer. When she stood to leave, she didn't ask if she could come back, and I didn't offer. She picked up her purse slowly, adjusted the strap on her shoulder. Neither of us rushed. She turned toward the door and I followed. The air was cooler now, the sun lower in the sky. A long shadow stretched across the porch between us. She paused in the doorway, glanced back. Our eyes met, really met. And I saw it, not repaired, not a full return, but a beginning, the kind that doesn't erase what happened, the kind that says, let's try to understand it, together, maybe, someday. I gave a small nod. She returned it. Then she stepped outside, and I closed the door gently behind her. Not shut, just closed. For now. Every morning, before the neighborhood truly wakes, I step onto the porch with a small watering can in one hand and quiet thoughts in the other. The violets sit in their clay pots, clustered together like little sentinels, their purple petals still damp with sleep. Good morning, I whisper to them, tipping the spout gently. They don't rush. They just lean toward the sun, grateful, confident, still. They don't ask if they're enough. They don't apologize for taking up space on my railing. I used to think blooming required permission, that you had to earn it, be invited, be chosen. But now I know. It only needs light, a little patience, and somewhere soft enough to stretch. They've taught me that. The scent of damp soil mixes with the sweetness of nearby wildflowers. My hands are always a little cool from the water, my heart always a little warmer when I see how alive they are. I water them like old friends, and in return, they remind me I belong here, without asking. He doesn't say much when he comes. Just walks up the steps with that same soft knock, holding a coffee in each hand. One for me, always with cream, never sugar. Morning, he says. I nod. Morning. We sit side by side on the porch swing, sipping quietly while the breeze moves through the trees and the sun dances across the railings. We talk about the small things, the weather, a headline, the neighbor's cat that's getting too bold with the bird feeder, never about that morning, never about what was said or not said. And honestly, that's okay. Some wounds don't heal because we pick at them. They soften because we leave them alone long enough to scab, to breathe. He's here. He keeps coming. And each visit, each cup of coffee, says something that words wouldn't. Get right anyway. It's not an apology. It's presence, and that matters more. She leaves the gate open now, not wide. Just enough to say, I'm here and I'm not afraid. I see her coming up the path with a little bag in hand, sometimes muffins, sometimes a paperback she thinks I'll like, sometimes just her and her nervous smile. She doesn't look down. As much these days. She settles into the chair next to mine with less effort, less tension in her shoulders. We watch the birds pick at the feeder, and the silence between us feels easy. Like we're not trying to fill it anymore. I notice the way her eyes linger on my hands now, watching how I hold my teacup, how I fuss with the hem of my sweater. It's like she's trying to memorize them again, trying to learn me in this version of my life, and I let her, because showing up like this, that's how trust starts again. We've never talked about that morning, not once. Not the burnt toast, not the ache in my chest, not the quiet that used to hurt. Maybe we're both afraid, or maybe we've both learned that not all healing needs a name. Now, when she visits, we talk about flowers. About what's blooming, about whether the porch needs repainting, about the neighbor's grandchild who keeps riding her bike too fast around the corner, and somehow, that's enough. We don't water the past. We water what's growing here now. She brings me tea without asking. On the way, I set out her favorite mug without needing to say a word. The apology lives in those gestures, and I accept it. Every time. This porch wasn't built for me. Not in wood or memory. I wasn't raised in this town. I didn't grow up on these streets. I didn't dream of rocking chairs or morning violets. But now, the swing holds the shape of my back. The floorboards remember the rhythm of my steps. The breeze brings my stories to the bees that hum lazily, past the railing. I didn't end up where I thought I would, but I bloomed here anyway, in a place that wasn't planted for me, and that makes the blooming all the more beautiful. I used to think broken things were meant to be thrown out, that once something cracked, it was over, but I've learned better. Sometimes the mug cracks, but the tea still holds its warmth. Sometimes a family bends, but the love doesn't spill out. It just shifts, finds new corners to rest in. We didn't stay the same. We broke in ways I didn't see coming. But I didn't lose everything. I found the parts that truly mattered, the ones that stayed, showed up, learned how to listen again. The golden light drapes across the porch now, long and soft. A few violet petals have fallen to the floorboards, and still they reach for the sun. So do I. Sometimes, the softest kind of healing comes not from fixing what broke, but from choosing to keep growing anyway. If any part of my story felt familiar, to you, I'd be honored to hear yours in the comments, and if you'd like to walk through more quiet moments with me, you're always welcome to subscribe.